There is no end to knowledge. It is not that you read a book, pass an examination, and finish with education. The whole of life, from the moment you are born to the moment you die, is a process of learning. So, for starting a new chapter of learning, or we can say a new webinar, I, Sheetal, your host for the day, wants to extend a warm greeting and good evening to all of you present here. On behalf of our whole SEMS family, I welcome you all for today's international webinar on the topic food sector in a post-COVID world. I hope you all are doing well and good. Also, I see a quite number of people are joining us. Before I proceed, let me take a brief moment for the introduction of my organization. SIMS Welfare Foundation, that is SWF, is a non-profit entity established to work in the areas of education, social welfare, women empowerment, skill development and entrepreneurship, livelihood generation, etc. SIMS Group has conducted various international conferences, seminars, workshops, and webinars in emerging technologies in various parts of India and has an active network of 3,000 plus engineers, managers, researchers, etc. As discussed earlier, the topic for today's webinar is food sector in a post-COVID world by our speaker of the day, Payal B. Joshi ma'am. Let me take a brief introduction of her. Payal B. Joshi ma'am is currently serving as a Director, Operations and Head Method Development at Shefali Research Laboratories situated in Ambernath, Thane districts, Maharashtra, India. She is officiating as a core member of the research team and heading projects related to food science, bioactive compounds, nanomedicine and immune food boosters. She is MSc in organic chemistry and PhD in chemical science. She has been in research and academia for 15 years. She is a peer reviewer of Tier 4 journals such as chemical biology, drug design, education and information technologies and analytical letters to name a few. Currently, she is working towards food science, chemical education, machine learning, green chemistry, and nanomedicine. She is a live member of Indian Pharmaceutical Association and California Separation Science Society. On discussing this in detail, I am profusely delighted to have our guest speaker Payal B. Joshi ma'am. This world is full of diamonds and gems, and we are having one of them here today. So, without any further ado, I would like to give my heartiest welcome to our chief guest speaker, Payal B. Joshi ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sheetal, for the introduction and for your kind words. And before I start with my presentation, I thank SEMS Welfare Foundation to give me an opportunity to talk about the work that I'm presently doing. Okay, so I welcome all the participants. I want to talk about, as the topic says, we are talking about the food sector in a post COVID world. So, why this topic is of relevance today is because we have seen maximum disruption in this area of food industry and food technology. All right from the time when the very first closure happened, when COVID crisis came into purview, the very first thing that happened was the supply disruption of food supplies happened across the globe. So there was a certain panic buying that we observed amongst the consumers, and what happened during the pandemic and what is happening currently in the food sector. So in the Shefali Research Laboratories, we are doing extensive research in the area of food science and food chemistry. We are doing research projects pertaining to women health, where we talk about how health is related to food science. So today, before I delve into my topic, I'll just give you an outline as to how we are going to go about this topic. The points are very clear. The very first thing that we have to see is the changing face of food sector. I believe that food industry is one of the biggest industries which has an expanse right from restaurants to the people who are chefs, who have a profession of chefs. You can be a food critic, you can work in wine industry, you can work in beverage industry, you can work in processing industry. Also, you have a different facet of R&D in the food sector. So food business as such is a very big business. We are seeing a changing face over the period of time. So I'll just show you a brief statistic about that. The second point is, considering that there are many of the questions that I have got from most of the students and young researchers around, that what are the opportunities in the food sector at present. So that also is something that I'll be highlighting throughout my conversation with you. And then I will also give you some interesting examples of the food sector. So my intention would be, my objective is today, for today's topic, is when you completely listen to me, I think something that you'll be taking out from this webinar, from this conversation that we have today, and some learning that you can incorporate in your day-to-day life when you talk about food. So first thing, and first and foremost, is we have a big mission. When we talk about food sector, our direct correlation comes with the SDGs. Now, what do you mean by SDGs? SDGs means Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, this was being formulated in 2018 by United Nations in the 2018 report, and there are total of 17 SDGs which we are looking at. So currently what you're seeing onto my slide is the poster of the United Nations protocol of what are those 17 SDGs. Out of 17 SDGs, today I will not be talking about them. I'll only hit upon those SDGs which are related to food sector. Okay, all of them are not related. They are interlinked in some way or the other. The very first SDG is SDG number 2, which talks about zero hunger. All right. The third one that talks about SDG, that is 3, that talks about good health and well-being. Then comes SDG 12, which talks about responsible consumption and production. Ideally speaking, students and participants, I would say that food, public health, and agriculture are interrelated. Okay, so these are the 3 facets that we see which are interrelated to each other. They are not separate. So I think agriculture is one of these sectors which is interrelated to food and public health. We gave a lot of importance to public health when we were in discrepancy, in deficiency of vaccines during that time. So at that particular point of time, we were more interested to go for immune boosting foods. Okay, so we were going for foods like, we were going for garlic and ginger consumption. We were going for those consuming those supplements like vitamin C and vitamin D that time. I'm sure that you must have heard WHO saying and releasing those protocols where they said that you have to consume vitamin C and vitamin D for enhancing your immunity. So immune boosting foods is also one of the areas which got a boost during the pandemic, and now also we are seeing that happening. I'm also going to relate it to the agricultural practices. Now you may say that why we are considering the agricultural practices is because everything is interrelated. Now when I say agriculture, basically we are looking from farm to fork. Okay, so farm is from where all the farming happens. Farming does not only restrict itself to the crops or to the produce that we make. Normally, the very first thing that comes in our mind when I say farm is basically we say that, okay, it's all about, there is a big field and we have a lot of crops. But farming also encompasses animal farming, seafood farming, which we see across. Korea is one such where there is a higher consumption of seafood, is what we see. So these are all these farming practices are interrelated to the food industry. Alternatively, it is also connected to the global emissions that we are having. So if you believe that, okay, today I'm taking a public transport, but I'm eating meat, somewhere you are not cutting the global emissions. So apart from these 3, which I've highlighted in an arrow, there is one more which is kind of interrelated, is the SDG 13, which I've not pointed on the slide, but climate change is also very much related to the food sector. So consumer behavior is very important, and it is the driving factor of these innovations that we see in the industry, especially food industry. Consumer behavior actually encompasses everything. It drives the market, and direct correlation comes in the food sector. All right. So I think coming to the point now, there is one problem that we are seeing, especially I can talk about the survey that we have seen around. And this survey was done in 21, wherein there is always, after every 2 or 3 years, they always do this release of the global hunger index, right? So in this case, what we observe is what is the ranking of all the countries. So I would encourage every participant who is right now listening to me once the session is over to look at where does their country stand. At present, India is standing at a serious position from at a rank of 27.5, which is very serious at present. Though India is considered as an agricultural country, agricultural hub, yet we are facing this problem. Now, what do you mean? How is this score calculated? So the score calculation is also provided on the website, but I can give you just some clue and I'll try to decode how they are doing this calculation. Now, GHI score means the Global Hunger Index score, which was done just last year. And they released this, you can see this is the zone. So if you have less than 9.9, it's the lowest. Now, India stands somewhere at 27.5. You can even check for your country respectively and see where your country stands today. The GHI score is based on fourfold parameters. One is undernourishment. So they've given the score and parameter of 1/3. I'll try to decode that when I'm talking to you. Child mortality, because when you talk about hunger, children, how malnourished they are is what we are looking at, 1/3. Child wasting. Now, what do you mean by child wasting? Please understand it is 1/6. What do you mean by child wasting? It is such a difficult and a very detrimental condition wherein the child cannot be weighed on a weighing machine. So they have much lower BMI. It's beyond a very serious condition where the child cannot be weighed, is completely clinically malnourished. So this is one of the cases where we call as child wasting. Okay, so that is one of the parameters that they consider when they calculate the GHI score. And then is child stunting, wherein normally the development starts after the age of 2 years or 3 years in terms of growing of nails. International Food Policy Research Institute. So in 21, India ranked at 101 out of 116 countries in terms of severity of the hunger when measured on GHI score. Secondly, what we are observing that 15% of the Indians have chronic calorie deficiency. And you can see the other statistics. I will not be reading them out. You can just check that is basically we are seeing in terms of 15% suffered from wasting. That is absolutely a clinical malnourishment we observe. 38.8% for stunted growth and mortality at 5%. So this is again a very serious condition. Now, when you say hunger and how they are related to the food science is what I'm going to come at. So until and unless we don't understand the sustainable development goal, we won't be able to understand the opportunities the food sector is providing us. So agriculture, the biodiversity of your country, and sustainable living, this is all correlated. And this is driving the business in the food sector. In fact, I'll put it this way, that food is a human right. Basically, food is a human right. But today we are considering it in the food sector as a branding opportunity. Like I'll give you an example. Like if you say noodles, you will just quickly say either we are having the ramen noodles or we are having YY noodles. If I say chicken, you will immediately have the very first thing in your mind is the KFC chicken bucket. So this is a branding opportunity that food has already entered into our food cycle. And it has actually disrupted. Culturally, the food industry has disrupted the way we think about food. So the very first goal as a researcher for me in food science is to raise an awareness amongst the public that how food sector is bringing about a cultural invasion in us and how we are supposed to make a conscious decision as to when we choose our meals, whether it is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So cultural invasion has already occurred in form of some outlet or the other. KFC, McDonald's have eroded our natural food systems at a global level. Now, it is only up to us whether we can make a conscious decision as a consumer, whether we can choose these foods very wisely, right? So I'm talking about how the food sector has invaded. It can happen in form of some food chain. It can happen through a Zomato takeout food that you're bringing home. It's a convenience food, no doubt. It's a 2-minute meal, no doubt. But what are you compensating? What are you giving away in this entire process? So we have to keep this in mind. Working with nature. Now we have to really work with nature. We have to come back to nature when we talk about choosing our foods right. We have to be farmer friendly. Now, what do you mean by farmer friendly? Ecological farming is the key. I'll give you a very simple example that when you tour around, okay, let us take an example that you're touring around and if you're touring, let us say I'm from India, if I'm touring in Korea, I should take the local produce of that. Okay. I should not be going in some American outlet and taking some food from there. I should be more inclusive for the farmers and the local produce. So go in the local market. Like example is, again, we tend to purchase our products and our food products from the big market. Okay. Something which looks from a mall, from a shopping mall, we are the ones, we are going for that. This is all a branding opportunity for the food sector, and they are cashing on the compromise of our health. Okay. So we have to become more farmer friendly. Issues of genetic engineering, I'm going to talk about. I'll give you an example from some of this in my laboratory. So I'll just keep this, holding on to this thought for some time. There is a movement at present which is going on in India, which is the Navadanya movement. We cannot talk about agriculture without mentioning about seeds. I think seeds is something from where the life begins, and we have to protect our seeds. We have to protect, once we protect our seeds, we are protecting our farmers, right? So we are going to talk about a little more about agricultural practices and how industries have entered into it, and how food industry is making money out. So one example, now this picture is what I observed. Now I'll tell you, this is the one of the case studies that we have done in the recent times, is we are comparing intercropping versus industrial monocropping. Now when I say monocropping and when I say intercropping, now these are the two farming practices which we see across the globe, across the country. Now, the picture that you're seeing over here is basically showing moong with sugarcane. Now, you may say, what is moong? Moong is a pulse. Okay, it's a pigeon pea, it's a pulse which is grown. It's a shrub. Basically, it is a shrub which you can see over here. And you have sugarcane. Now, ideally speaking, the participants, I would say that when you talk about farming, okay, so if you go to Denmark or you go to New Zealand, you'll find monocropping, because the diversity, the geographical conditions are such that you have to go for monocrop. You cannot westernize the same thing at every location, say in Africa or in India. You cannot do that. The reason behind this is, we have observed when we say monocropping. Now, what do you mean by monocropping? Monocropping means, mono means one, cropping means to grow only one type of crop across the field. The issue of monocropping is, it is more susceptible, your crops are more susceptible to pests, insects. All right. And if it is more susceptible to attack of pests and insects, what will happen? The farmer will tend to use more pesticides. So are you getting this? If you are using more, if you're creating an agricultural practice where you have to do monocropping, you will grow more crops. Naturally, when you grow more crops, you are definitely going to have only one type of crop across the field, more liable, more susceptible to attack by ants and from crows and from other pests. That is, naturally you will tend to use more pesticide. That is what happened in the Monsanto protocol, and that is from where the genesis of Navadanya movement started in India. And they said that no, we have to protect our farming practices, we have to go back to the traditional practices. So that is called as intercropping. Now I'll tell you, intercropping was observed, this is somewhere in Mahabaleshwar. Mahabaleshwar is a hill station. It's a beautiful place which is 5 kilometers away from Mumbai. And in Mahabaleshwar, which is in the Satara district of India, in Maharashtra, so you will observe that there is intercropping done, which is a beautiful practice, and there is no need of pesticides over here. That is intercropping between moong and sugarcane. So you can see here, now how does this happen? It's a symbiotic relationship. Moong, as in, I'll just tell to all the participants who have joined from the other countries and from the other locations, moong is a pigeon pea, it's a pulse, okay? It's a shrub. So it's a small shrub which is growing nearer to the ground, nearer to the soil. Sugarcane, on the other hand, is much more vertical plant, vertical crop, which is again having a different requirement. Now you can see over here, so there is a crop for moong, there is a second crop for second row for sugarcane. So it is moong, sugarcane. The pulse is sugarcane. So one row for sugarcane, the other row for the pigeon pea, the one row for sugarcane, so on and so forth. Now this disrupts and this confuses the insects and the pests. who are attacking your field. This is called as sustainable agricultural practice. Now, why do I say so? Both these plants are symbiotic in nature. Reason: these pulses, they tend to release nitrogenous compounds within the soil. Okay, nitrogen is very important, very imperative for the sugarcane to thrive on the soil. So the plant itself is releasing nitrogen and causing the sugarcane to absorb that nitrogen. Secondly, when the sugarcane is growing vertically, so what is happening? It is providing shade. Okay, please understand, it is providing shade to the shrub. So it is symbiotic. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. And this is the basic practice, sustainable agricultural practice, which we see across in the districts, in the locations of India, locations of Maharashtra, particularly because we have done a lot of survey in this area. So intercropping versus industrial monocropping is something that we look at. Same thing happens now. You cannot do intercropping everywhere. There is one argument that they say that, can we do intercropping everywhere? No, you cannot do it for rice. Okay, rice has to be done as a monocrop. So it depends upon which crop you're growing and on which soil you're growing. So these are called as sustainable agricultural practices. Okay, this also is synergistic. You will require less number of pesticides and insecticides on your field. Naturally, you will go for a better, and for, if you have lesser pesticide, when the product or the produce comes on your in your kitchen, you are definitely not going to use additional detergents, which came somewhere in the COVID time, that you have to use some kind of a detergent to clean the surfaces of the vegetables so that they become more lucrative, and they become, it's basically another market that has come up, especially post COVID, because we observed that if you have surface contamination, definitely your vegetables are getting contaminated. Let me put it this way, let me raise an awareness: you don't need those products. Okay, just a simple water and baking soda is all that you need to clean the surfaces. You don't need these additional chemicals which has been propagated and branded to the market through some advertising company or through some advertisements on television. All right, so this is one example, and I hope it can create some awareness when you are bringing your produce into your kitchens. Next is, what is the trend that we saw which accelerated during the COVID-19? We saw that we were more interested until the vaccines didn't come up into the market, and we were worried that when shall the vaccines come. We were more interested in boosting our immune system. That became a priority for the consumer. Okay, apart from panic buying of all the local produce, whether potatoes or tomatoes, very commonly they were greater in demand in India. I'm sure that what happened in the other countries, I think other participants can definitely let me know. The major boosting of immune system was a priority for the consumers. Secondly, when the lockdown happened, what happened is we did not see restaurants opening up. So there was a greater awareness amongst the public to go for home cooked foods. So prepare your foods at home. And that is what we looked at. So there was no Zomato, no other branding opportunities from the market coming into our homes and take out food. So we gave more importance as a consumer for home cooked meals, and we used to take the pictures and put it on Instagram, right? So one thing is that post COVID-19, consumers' interest was enhanced in sustainable, healthy, functional foods. They increased rapidly. So the business for obtaining or for producing these supplements also enhanced. Increased intake of fruits was observed, herbal tonics was observed, and vitamins. So you must have heard vitamin C you have to take, vitamin D you have to take. Okay, you are enhancing your immunity. Secondly, make some herbal tonics. Okay, take tea and lemon, take tea and honey, and make those complement. So these complementing foods are called as functional foods. That also got a big market, and we got a big narrative that if we use these, we have no need to go for vaccine, which is again a misconception. Consumption of ginger, tea, and garlic also increased. Okay, so this is a pattern. So there is a direct correlation. So whatever consumers are choosing, we are observing that is impacting the agriculture also. It is also impacting the global emission, and it is also impacting the food industry. And they are making money out of the choices that we make on our plate. All right. So this is one of the things that we observed. And basically, when you talk about vitamin, is something I want to talk about. Vitamin highlights all about your bioactive constituents. I think we are working at present in this direction that vitamins, we are having maximum in India, we are having maximum problem of vitamin D deficiency, which is kind of related to calcium intake, calcium absorption, because vitamin D and calcium absorption, they go hand in hand. So though no matter we have maximum sunlight in India, we still have vitamin D deficiency, because vitamin D deficiency is what we are trying to harness in the industry by producing more of vitamin D supplements. Issues of weight gain happened a lot during the pandemic. Naturally, that was another issue which led to fat dietary supplements. So go for such fat diets so that you can reduce your weight in a very short period of time. This is another industry which is grooming along in the food sector. So you can imagine the expanse of the food sector and how they are trying to enter into every domain of public health. Okay, apart from immunity, it has now also entered into the weight mark. Next is across the globe, we have maximum consumption of global beef. It's almost 2%, which is responsible, if statistically, if I have to put it, it is around 0.28% of the global emissions. Now, beef is another concern. Again, you may say that if we are going for beef, can we have a substitute? So now the market is pushing towards that alternative, wherein we can use something alternate to meat. There is a kind of awareness amongst the people which is being generated that if you are using a plant-based meat products, we can go for that particular market. Now, a lot of game players have come into this area because it has been so said that if you are including a lot of meat diet, okay, or meat-based diet, you are trying to upset the hormonal balances in your body. This is another narrative that has been generated across by the food industry and the food media, and we have to look into that aspect as well. So this is another concern. Another thing is, it has been told that the way in which the killing or the farming of these animals happen. So this is another narrative. So this has also resulted in a consumer change, behavioral change, how they purchase their meat, how they purchase the chicken, how they purchase the different lambs and meat and beef. So what kind of consumption we see over there. So as I told you, coming back to my point that food is a human right and a necessity. It's not a branding opportunity. As a consumer, if we have this in our mind, we will not be shelling out a lot of money in the wrong direction, in the narrative being given by food advertisements or by the food companies. So this is one thing. Branding of food has actually caused a lot of health hazard in many ways. It's not COVID-19 just. It is also the branding opportunity that the companies saw. And especially it has affected the young adults and women. I'll be talking about one concern amongst women. Now we have a tie-up with some of the gynecologists, and I'm working very closely with some of the gynecologists and the hospitals which are dealing with, and the fertility clinics. In some years, over the years, we are getting some survey reports from these hospitals which says that infertility is going to be a bigger issue in the coming time. Already we are facing infertility issue amongst couples who are trying to conceive for a considerable period of time and they are being unable to do so. So women health is something that is also kind of related to food. I'll give you an example. Now, there is a case study that we are currently doing is about uterine fibroids amongst women. Now, this is one study that we are being currently doing in our case study, where uterine fibroid is directly related to your food intake. Now, I do not know many of you are unaware that processed food has direct correlation to your hormonal imbalance and uterine fibroids. And unfortunately, the only treatment for uterine fibroid is surgery. There is no medicine. There is nothing that we can do. All the other operations that have been suggested by research is very costly, especially if you talk about magnetic embolization. Women have this problem. If you have uterine fibroid, you will not be able to conceive. And if you have conceived, you will have to abort the child and you have to first get your fibroid removed from the uterus and then go for conceiving. This is the research that our laboratory is presently working on. We want to generate awareness that how public health is being at stake, especially women health is at stake. as far as the food is concerned. I'll come to that a little later. So according to, now this is a report that has been generated by the GPS, that is a Global Perspective and Solutions report. Our current global food system is unfit. We cannot achieve a net zero future. Now, many people are saying that we have to have a global emission to achieving zero. It's not possible until and unless the food sector changes. So we have to change our food habits. We have to change our food choices. Basically, we have to go for more towards traditional agricultural practices. Then and only then, these concerted efforts will result in a climate action. So we cannot say that just merely commuting by a public transport will help cutting down greenhouse emission. It is the food. The food choice that we make has a direct correlation with how food sector plays with our choices. It dictates as to how we are supposed to plan our meals and things like that. Hidden costs are also there. We do believe that, okay, we have this cost factor, how we are trying to look at the inflation and how we are looking at the hidden cost. Food industry is never going on a vacation. Food industry is growing like at an accelerated pace in some way or the other. Even though the restaurants closed down or the food chains or the resorts closed down, during that time, still they made money out of it. Second industry, which will never go on a vacation, is the pharmaceutical industry. So these two industries have a lucrative opportunity for the young researchers across the globe. And the market is also standing at a very tall figure, at a towering figure of 11.9. So you can see all these figures over here, $11.9 trillion, which is the current market value. We are using a lot of water in our food industries. In agriculture, there is a lot of water usage happening. Deforestation is another problem when you talk about agriculture and food production. 50% of habitable land is used for food production itself, overall responsible for 1/3 of all the greenhouse emission. So I believe that food sector is something that really needs to take up the sustainable development goals into their vision and mission and start generating awareness amongst the public and take necessary action in that direction. So that can only happen when the consumer behavior changes. Then the industry will definitely change maybe they will tweak some or the other vision and their mission. So this is one, I think, the plant-based meat. So I think there has been a concern that when you have a meat-based diet or a beef-based diet, the growing concern is cardiovascular diseases. And that is the reason why the consumers are now very much interested towards the plant-based meat. Okay, it's a big market with FMCG, that is the fast-moving company goods. They are the ones, corporate goods, which are entering into this business. And you can see Tata, which is one of the biggest company, ITC entering into this. So you can see all these pictures and all these products which have come into our market. The revenue has also increased because these are all fast moving corporate goods which are entering into the market, and they are all bringing plant-based meat into the sector. There are two things. There is one very good merit in this area. Plant-based meat or artificial meat or mimic meat is something that can reduce the chances of vascular diseases amongst the population. Secondly, it takes care about the way in which the animal farming is happening at present. That's the good part. So let me first highlight about the good part and why these businesses are entering here. One thing is that there are no hormones which are being injected into these foods. Okay, whether you talk about plant-based meat, so you're using cells of the plants, you're doing some biopsy of these cells, you're using them, you're culturing them in the lab. So it's a lab grown meat. It's an analog meat. Analog means it will taste similar, it will look similar texture wise. Now we know how the meat looks like. It is juicy, it is firm, it has a particular texture. The taste has a particular juiciness we look for. So this same kind of feel can we bring for a lab grown meat. So this is a very interesting, a very lucrative market which has entered into the food sector. So this is again one, I must say, it is a very interesting field where we are doing currently, we can just grow meat in a beaker or in a petri plate. So this is one thing I can say is it has a lucrative opportunity in terms of research and development. Another thing, it has already entered the market. Positive point is the greenhouse emissions may go low, right? Another thing is what we can observe is there are no injectables, there are no hormones being injected especially in beef and in red meat, there is a lot of chances that there is an injectable being done so that it looks more red, it looks more juicy, it tastes well, the texture, it should look very nice and presentable so the consumer can go for those products. So this is what we are observing. The same thing is what is being looked at in plant-based meat. So we prepare those substitutes. We can use mushroom, which is again a fungus. It's again a plant-based fungus. Secondly, you can use tofu. You can use some wheat gluten. These are the different modalities and these are the different food stuffs being utilized to prepare these meat analogs. So we are seeing this as again a lucrative market which is entering into our into our food sector and to the public health. Controversial point would be that how safe are these? Something that is grown in the lab, how comfortable will the consumer be for going for these kind of foods? One, we'll have to bring an awareness that, okay, it is going to reduce the global house gases or the emissions that we observe. It is going to be safer to consume because it has no adverse effects in terms of cardiovascular diseases, in terms of any thyroid imbalances or things like that. So that is one thing we can take care of. Thirdly, there is a general curiosity. Okay, if you say plant-based meat, I have never had that. So you'll have a general curiosity that, okay, I want to have a flavor as to how does it look similar, does it taste similar to the meat that I usually have. So there is a general curiosity. The market is taking that and harping on that as well. So you can see how food can enter into the consumer brains, into the consumer needs, and bring that in the market. Finally, I wanted to talk about the women health, and the current research study that we have done is we are correlating fibroid with food. Okay, fibroid is a uterine, it's a benign tumor. It is not cancerous. It is a benign tumor found in the uterus of the woman, and it has either it can be symptomatic or it can be asymptomatic. Symptomatic, which means during that course, if the fibroid is at a accelerated growth, they will have a heavy bleeding. There will be cramping. There will be some kind of a symptom where the menstrual cycle gets disrupted. There is a heavy bleeding. So anemia is another condition that we observe if it goes unchecked. The major reason that we are observing for the occurrence of uterine fibroids on a rise amongst women is due to higher consumption of salt, higher consumption of sugars. Now, from where do these come from? They come from all of your processed foods, the packet foods. All the packet foods that you're having at present, whether it is noodle, which is a 2-minute meal, whether it is your chips that you're having, any kind of, even sugar, even the table salt is a processed food. So they have all entered into your food chain. Very difficult. In fact, I would say impractical to replace them. So how do we replace them? How do we have a sustainable, a practical solution to change our diet? So we have to, first and foremost, we have to stop these processed foods, right? If we stop these processed food, I do not mean practically you can stop it. Some way or the other, we are busy with our lives. We are going to use some way or the other, but we can at least reduce the consumption, the overall consumption which has been observed. Why it is related? Processed foods have very high sugar and salt content. Secondly, it is all trans fat. So it all enters into your food cycle. It all enters into your circulatory system. It imbalances your hormones. And obviously, if it imbalances your hormones, if you have a higher estrogen in your body, definitely you're moving towards tumor. You're going to have fibroids or much serious condition. If it goes unchecked, you may even have a cancer. So these things are, so we always say there is nothing that we are trying to scare our women towards this, but we want to generate awareness that your food choice is what is going to drive. My last point for the day is what should we do? I believe that consumer has their role to play, but I think food sector has a bigger role to play. So I think what I would suggest, and whatever the collaboration that I'm presently in, I work on the 3-way approach. The first approach is developing a framework. Second, we have to have a strategic forefront. We as me, I mean to say, not as a consumer, we as in, I mean to say the industries and current initiatives. So I'll just talk about the current initiatives which has already started in the industry. Developing a framework, you have to include all the SDGs. You cannot say that any business which is only making money is a bad business. You have to incorporate sustainable business model. So go for these SDGs 2, 3, 12, and 13. So 2 is zero hunger. It should be achievable by 2030 is what the United Nations is talking about. 3 talks about your good health and well-being. So if you feel well, you will eat well and you will feel well. So good health and well-being goes hand in hand. Then 12, responsible consumption and production. So this is both way. Food sector has to be agriculture has to responsibly produce. Consumer has to responsibly consume. 13 is climate action. That is going to be taken care of if all the first 3 SDGs are taken care of. Understanding agriculture as per land and farming practices, we have to understand our farming practices. So whether it is seafood farming, whether it is your regular farming, which you're doing on the crop, I showed you an example of intercropping and monocropping. That is one of the cases. Strategic forefront is the research areas that got affected by the pandemic, is the food safety, bioactive compounds, your vitamins, food security and sustainability. Now, if I do not know if any of the participants are belonging to IT sector, I think IT is one industry, information technology. If you are belonging to blockchain technology, where the food supply chain is very much in vogue. So I believe that if you have a degree in this area, that is in blockchain technology, if you're in IoT, that is Internet of Things, you can help us in the food supply chain sector. That is the supply chain management. SCM is what we call it. So I think food supply and food safety is an area where I think we need engineers of belonging to IT industry, from IT sector. If you have a degree in that domain, I think you can definitely help the food industry in that. IoT is another, blockchain technology, as I told you. So these are the areas which you can touch upon. So it is not only open for scientists and for chemists and for natural sciences or for agriculture. It is also for engineers. This is one strategic forefront I think the industry should keep in mind. Current initiatives, as I told you, is meat analogs we are going for. Food as a brand opportunity, it is going to remain. So there is nothing that we can fight out. We have to have a branding opportunity. It is a lucrative opportunity because we cannot do away with finance. Obviously, money is the one that is going to keep it thriving. So branding opportunity will be there. But at this point, I think this current initiative can be taken not with the exclusion of SDGs. We have to take this into its opportunity. Supply chain. I told you that blockchain technology is very important. And food safety is again very imperative and an initiative from both the ends. Especially in terms of industry, we have to take into aspect how we are having a relentless supply. We should have our branding opportunity, but not at the cost of public health. You can have a branding opportunity, but don't take away the very fact that you are compromising the public health on a bigger scale. It is not a good business model. It is not going to go. It may happen for a year or two. You will get good profits, but it is not a sustainable business model. So on that note, I would like to end my presentation and my talk. If there are any queries or concerns, please let me know.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this really informative and incredible session. Should a pure veg guy can consume the plant-based meat? This is the question, ma'am.
Yeah. Now, plant-based meat, the very first thing that you'll have to keep in mind is basically they are made from the plant cells, right? As a consumer, you should be aware that these products, you can just go into these markets, you can go to these malls, you check the ingredients. Please don't just check that it is of a particular brand. Okay, we always see the brand. We say, okay, this is KFC, we should take it. It is from a Tata company, ITC company, it's a big company, we should take it. Please turn over the packet, read the ingredients. It hardly takes a time. It hardly takes some few seconds to just check. Those ingredients will help you understand that is it really vegetarian? Is it really plant-based in its true sense? Then and only then you can venture into this direction. Okay. Let me put it this way. The plant-based analog meat is purely prepared from the plant cells. They are taken from mushroom cells. So if you, and I think vegetarians, they have a problem even with edible mushrooms. I think that is another concern. So that is one of the problems. So again, plant-based meat cannot be entirely a vegetarian diet as per your definition. So you as a consumer should have a definition of what do you mean by vegetarian. Are you getting this? So if you have an issue with eating, they are putting these mushroom cells. So they are going, because that has a typical texture and the taste of a meat based diet. You have to use mushroom. I'm telling you, we are using mushroom cells very commonly because they give us that bite, the juiciness that we want. Same thing goes for paneer, whether tofu, the processed cottage cheese is what you call. That also we are using. I hope that answers the question. So as a consumer, you please have a look at the ingredients.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, ma'am, for making our doubts clear. The webinar was really amazing. I would like to propose a heartiest vote of thanks to you for gracing today's webinar. Your presence and wise words helped magnifying in the best possible way. I hope all the participants learned a lot from this webinar. I would really like to thank you for giving us your valuable time, and I'm delighted to be part of today's webinar. A good event never ends in the world. They take only a pause and keep us waiting for the next. All good things eventually end. I consider everyone as fortunate that they become a part of this webinar, which was full of knowledge, which makes difficult to say goodbye.
Thank you, Sheetal. And at the end, I really want to thank SEMS Welfare Foundation for giving this opportunity. And I hope we have more such interactive, and I wish all the best to SEMS Welfare Foundation. Please keep going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.